Captain Zara Martinez stepped off the transport shuttle onto Station Omega-7, her worn military boots clicking against the polished metal floor. Around her, aliens of every conceivable shape and size moved through the massive diplomatic hub. The Crithians, with their crystalline exoskeletons, caught the artificial light, while the gas form Velari drifted in their containment suits like living clouds. Yet despite the incredible diversity surrounding her, Zara felt the familiar weight of being unremarkable. She was human. Average height, brown hair pulled back in a regulation bun, brown eyes that had seen too much war. Nothing about her appearance suggested she was anything more than another mid-level military officer attending yet another peace negotiation. The other species barely glanced her way as she made her way to the central conference chamber. The Galactic Council had been trying to broker peace between the Hegemony Alliance and the Outer Rim Coalition for 3 standard years. Millions had died in the conflict that had torn through 17 star systems. Zara had fought in 6 major battles, watched good soldiers die, and seen entire colonies reduced to ash and radiation. She was tired of war, but she was just a captain. Nobody important enough to stop anything. Ambassador Thexval, a towering Earthak with 4 arms and skin like polished obsidian, was already addressing the assembled delegates when Zara slipped into the observer section. His voice boomed through the translation matrices, each word dripping with barely contained rage. The Coalition's attacks on our mining operations in the Kepler sector constitute nothing less than acts of terrorism, Thexval declared, his secondary arms gesticulating wildly. They target civilian installations, murder non-combatants, and then claim moral superiority. This is unacceptable. Across the chamber, Delegate Silnine of the Coalition rose from her serpentine coils, her scales shifting from blue to deep crimson with anger. The hegemony speaks of civilian targets while they systematically strip mine worlds that belong to indigenous populations. Our actions defend the defenseless against corporate colonialism. Zara had heard these arguments countless times before. Both sides had valid points, both had committed atrocities, and both were too proud to back down. The other council species watched with the detached interest of those who had stakes in the conflict, but weren't directly involved. The Cetacean Collective wanted the trade routes reopened. The Silicon Republic needed the rare Earth elements both sides were fighting over. Everyone had an angle. What made this different was the presence of General Corinth, the hegemony's supreme military commander, and Admiral Voss of the Coalition fleet. Having the top military leaders of both factions in the same room was unprecedented. It also meant that if these talks failed, the war would escalate beyond anything they'd seen before. Zara pulled up the tactical briefings on her datapad. Intelligence suggested both sides were preparing for Operation Final Solution and Operation Starbreaker, respectively, fancy names for what amounted to total warfare. Corinth had massed a fleet of 3,000 warships at the edge of Coalition space. Voss had positioned antimatter mines throughout 6 major hegemony systems. If shooting started here, billions would die within the first week. Perhaps, interrupted Counselor Vextha of the Wise Ones, her ancient voice carrying the weight of millennia, we might discuss reparations and border adjustments rather than past grievances. General Corinth, a massive Draknari whose species had evolved from predatory reptiles, slammed his clawed fist on the table. The impact left deep gouges in the supposedly indestructible council table. There will be no territorial concessions. The hegemony has invested too much blood and treasure in those systems to simply hand them over to pirates and terrorists. Admiral Voss, looking deceptively fragile in his coalition uniform despite his cybernetic enhancements, smiled coldly. Pirates and terrorists? General, your forces have burned 17 worlds to prevent their liberation. We have holocordings of hegemony ships using orbital bombardment against refugee camps. Alleged refugee camps that were launching missile attacks against our supply convoys, Corinth shot back. The tension in the chamber was becoming palpable. Zara noticed the security details of both sides had shifted positions slightly, hands drifting closer to weapons. The neutral council guards were also moving, trying to maintain positioning that would allow them to respond to trouble from any direction. She'd seen this before. The posturing, the escalating rhetoric, the moment when diplomacy died and violence took over. In about 10 minutes, someone would say something unforgivable, someone else would reach for a weapon, and this station would become a battlefield. The war would spread, more worlds would burn, and the cycle would continue. Zara found herself thinking about Lieutenant Chen, who died in her arms during the siege of Proxima Station. He'd been 22, fresh out of the academy, full of ideas about honor and duty. His last words were asking if his sacrifice had meant something. She'd lied and told him yes, but the truth was that Chen had died for nothing more than corporate profit margins and political posturing. She thought about the civilian transport they'd failed to evacuate from Kepler-7 before the Coalition's asteroid bombardment. 300 families, including children, vaporized because the hegemony couldn't spare enough ships for a proper evacuation fleet. Those children had trusted that the adults would keep them safe. The adults had failed. "Enough," Zara said, standing up. The word wasn't shouted or amplified, but somehow it cut through the increasingly heated argument like a blade. Every being in the chamber turned to look at her. She realized with growing horror that she had just interrupted a formal galactic council session. A captain, a nobody, a human who should have kept her mouth shut and let her betters handle the important decisions. General Corinth's vertical pupils fixed on her with predatory interest. "Captain Martinez, isn't it? I remember your service record. Competent, but hardly exceptional. I'm not sure why you think your opinion matters here." Admiral Voss nodded in agreement. Perhaps the first thing the two enemy commanders had agreed on in years. This is a diplomatic proceeding between sovereign powers. Military observers are here to observe, not participate. Ambassador Thexval's forearms crossed in a gesture of dismissal. "Indeed, Captain, please resume your seat and allow the adults to continue their discussion." Zara felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment, but something deeper was stirring in her chest. Anger. Yes, but also something she'd almost forgotten existed. Hope. Desperate. Probably foolish hope that maybe, just maybe, someone could cut through all the political nonsense and remind these beings what they were really talking about. "You're right," she said, her voice carrying farther than it should in the vast chamber. "I'm nobody important. Just another mid-level officer who spent the last 3 years watching good people die for your pride." The chamber had gone completely silent. Even the atmospheric recycling systems seemed to have quieted to listen. "I've been to 17 different battlefields in this war," Zara continued, taking a step forward. "I've held dying soldiers from both your sides. Do you know what they all had in common? None of them, not one, could explain why they were fighting. They knew their orders, they knew their unit designations, but they had no idea what victory was supposed to look like." Delegate Silnine's scales had shifted to a puzzled yellow-green. "Captain, while your experiences are doubtlessly tragic, personal anecdotes hardly constitute strategic analysis." "No, they don't," Zara agreed. "But I've also been reviewing the economic projections for this conflict. Would you like to know what I found?" She pulled out her data pad, though she didn't really need to look at the numbers. She'd memorized them during the long trip to Omega-7. At current expenditure rates, both the hegemony and the coalition will be bankrupt within 18 months. The hegemony is spending 47% of its total GDP on military operations. The coalition is at 51%. Neither of you can sustain this economically. General Corinth's laugh was like gravel grinding against metal. "Economic warfare has always been a component of total war, Captain. We're prepared to make the necessary sacrifices. Are you? Zara asked. Because according to these projections, continuing this war means the hegemony will have to implement food rationing on 63% of its core worlds within the year. The coalition is looking at massive unemployment as civilian industry gets converted to military production. Are you prepared to tell your populations that they need to starve so you can keep fighting over mining rights? The silence stretched longer this time. Zara could see the delegates exchanging glances, probably running their own calculations through their data networks. Admiral Voss was the first to speak. Even if your economic analysis is accurate, Captain, it doesn't address the fundamental issues that started this conflict. The hegemony's systematic exploitation of indigenous populations, their disregard for environmental protection, their aggressive expansion policies, and the coalition's support for terrorist organizations, General Corinth added smoothly. Their economic warfare against civilian populations, their use of weapons of mass destruction against non-military targets. You're both right, Zara said, and the simple statement seemed to hit the room like a physical blow. The hegemony has committed atrocities. So has the coalition. You're both monsters, and you're both victims, and you're both going to destroy everything you claim to be fighting for if this continues. She was definitely going to be court-martialed for this, probably executed for insubordination. But the words were coming out anyway, driven by 3 years of accumulated grief and rage and desperate hope. I've read the historical files on this conflict, she continued. You know what started this war? A trade dispute over mining concessions in the Vega system, a disagreement about royalty payments that could have been resolved in arbitration. But pride got involved, and politicians saw opportunity, and military contractors smelled profit, and now here we are. Millions dead over a bookkeeping error. Counselor Vexthal leaned forward, her ancient eyes focusing on Zara with unexpected intensity. What would you have us do, young captain? These grievances are real, the losses substantial. How does one simply stop a war that has consumed so much? Zara took another step forward, into the space between the opposing delegations. Security guards tensed, but no one moved to stop her. You remember why you started this, she said. Both sides wanted the same thing, prosperity for your people, security for your families, a future for your children. The methods got confused with the goals. You started fighting about how to achieve peace and prosperity, and somehow that turned into fighting for its own sake. She turned to address General Corinth directly. General, your service record shows 40 years of military excellence. You've never lost a major engagement. But tell me, what does victory look like? When you've defeated the coalition completely, destroyed their fleets, occupied their worlds, what then? You'll have a hegemony ruling over billions of resentful, starving, broken people who will spend the next century planning revenge. Corinth's expression was unreadable, but his claws had retracted slightly. Zara turned to Admiral Voss. Admiral, your tactical innovations have saved countless coalition lives. You're a brilliant strategist, but if you win, if you drive the hegemony back and break their corporate stranglehold on the outer systems, what then? You'll have 73 star systems with no infrastructure, no economy, no way to feed or house their populations because the hegemony's industrial base will be gone. She spread her arms, addressing the entire chamber. You're fighting over who gets to rule the ashes. There won't be anything left worth winning. The data pad in her hands chimed softly with an incoming priority message. Zara glanced down and felt her blood turn to ice water. Fleet Admiral Reyes to all coalition vessels, the text read. Long-range sensors have detected massive hegemony fleet movements in Sector 7. All ships to Battle Alert Alpha. Prepare for immediate combat operations. A similar message was undoubtedly reaching General Corinth's communication implants. She could see his expression shift from mild annoyance to deadly focus as he received whatever intelligence update his people were sending. Admiral Voss was also getting reports, his cybernetic eye flashing with data streams. His human eye had gone wide with what looked like shock. "Gentlemen," Zara said quietly, "it appears we're out of time." General Corinth stood slowly, his massive frame casting shadows across the entire coalition delegation. "Captain, you've spoken eloquently about the costs of war. Perhaps it's time you learned about the mathematics of military necessity. My scouts report coalition ships massing for what appears to be a first strike against hegemony core systems." Admiral Voss was on his feet as well, his hand resting on his sidearm. "Our intelligence shows hegemony dreadnoughts moving to attack positions around coalition worlds. General, if your forces open fire, we will respond with maximum force." The security teams were definitely reaching for weapons now. Zara found herself standing between two groups of beings who were about to start the very war she'd been trying to prevent, except now it would happen here, in this chamber, with her in the crossfire. "Wait," she said, but her voice seemed very small in the suddenly enormous space. They weren't listening to her anymore. General Corinth was speaking into his communication implant in rapid Draknari, probably ordering his forces to battle stations. Admiral Voss was doing the same in coalition military code. The various council delegations were evacuating toward their emergency exits. In 30 seconds, this room would be empty except for the opposing military forces and one very foolish human captain who had dared to think she could stop a war with words. The funny thing was, she wasn't afraid. She probably should have been terrified, but instead she felt a strange calm settling over her thoughts. She'd tried. It hadn't worked, but she'd tried. Lieutenant Chen would have been proud of her for trying. That's when her own communication implant activated with an override signal she'd never heard before. The priority code was so high it bypassed all security protocols and activated her emergency beacon simultaneously. "Captain Martinez," came a voice she didn't recognize, speaking in perfect, unaccented standard. "This is Control. Please state your position and status." Control? Zara had never heard of any military command structure called Control. Her implant's identification systems showed nothing but static when she tried to trace the signal's origin. This is Captain Martinez aboard Diplomatic Station Omega-7, she replied subvocally, hoping no one would notice her apparent conversation with herself. "Situation is deteriorating rapidly. Both sides are about to engage in combat." "Acknowledged, Captain. You are authorized to implement Protocol 7. "Protocol 7? Zara searched her memory for any reference to such a designation. Nothing. "Control, I don't have any information about Protocol 7. "Authorization is already in your implant, Captain. Check your command codes." With growing confusion, Zara accessed her military command interface. There, buried in a section she'd never seen before, was indeed a Protocol 7 authorization. The timestamp showed it had been installed 3 years ago, the day she'd graduated from the academy. How had she never noticed it before? She opened the protocol file and nearly dropped her datapad. Her service record had been altered, not falsified, but expanded. Her real rank wasn't captain, it was admiral, fleet admiral. Her command authority extended over not just human forces, but apparently had some kind of emergency jurisdiction over all council member militaries during existential crisis scenarios. Most shocking of all was her designation. It wasn't Captain Zara Martinez, unremarkable human officer. It was Fleet Admiral Zara Martinez, call sign Ordinary. And according to the files now appearing in her implant, when Admiral Ordinary spoke during a declared existential crisis, everyone else was required to listen. The authorization codes were genuine. She could verify them against council databases. Somehow, impossibly, the plain, ordinary, unremarkable human captain was actually one of the most powerful military commanders in known space. And judging by the chaos erupting around her, she was about to find out why. Zara's hands trembled as she accessed the Protocol 7 files flooding her implant. Each document carried security clearances she didn't know she possessed, revealing a shadow structure within the Galactic Council that apparently existed for exactly this moment. Her eyes scanned the authorization codes, cross-referencing them against her military academy training. Everything checked out. Somehow, impossibly, she had authority here. General Corinth was barking orders into his communication array, his scaled hide shifting to a deep crimson that indicated extreme agitation among his species. Admiral Voss had drawn his sidearm and was coordinating with his security detail. The council chamber had erupted into controlled chaos as delegates evacuated and guards took defensive positions. "All station security, this is Admiral Martinez," Zara said, activating her newly discovered command frequencies. "Implement lockdown protocols immediately. No one leaves this chamber without my authorization." The effect was immediate and startling. Every security system on the station responded to her codes. Blast doors sealed the chamber exits. Communication jammers activated, cutting off external contact. Emergency lighting bathed everything in a red glow that made the assembled beings look like they were trapped in blood. General Corinth spun around, his predator's reflexes bringing him face to face with Zara in one fluid motion. "Captain, what madness is this? You have no authority to implement station-wide security protocols." "Actually," Zara said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded, "I do." She raised her data pad, displaying the authorization codes that were still materializing in her implant. "Fleet Admiral Zara Martinez. Council Emergency Command Authority, call sign Ordinary." The reaction was immediate and profound. Admiral Voss actually staggered backward, his cybernetic eye flashing as it cross-referenced her claims against Coalition intelligence databases. General Corinth's vertical pupils dilated to mere slits, a sign of shock among the Draknari. Around the chamber, the various delegates who hadn't quite made it to the exits stopped moving entirely. Delegate Silnine's scales had shifted to pure white, indicating terror. "Ordinary," she whispered. "The ordinary admiral, but that's supposed to be a myth." "Apparently not," Zara replied, still reading through the files cascading across her visual interface. The scope of her actual position was staggering. She had emergency command authority over all Council military forces during existential crises. She had access to classified databases spanning centuries of galactic history. Most importantly, she had something called absolute override powers during declared emergencies, and according to the files, this situation definitely qualified. Counselor Vextha, who had remained seated throughout the evacuation panic, was watching Zara with an expression of something approaching satisfaction. "So," the ancient being said quietly, "it begins again." "Again?" Zara asked, looking up from her datapad. "The Emergency Council has existed for over 400 years, Vextha explained. Hidden within the regular structure, activated only when conventional diplomacy fails and extinction becomes possible. You are the 7th Ordinary Admiral, though you are the first human to hold the position." General Corinth's laugh was harsh and bitter. "A human? They made a human their ultimate authority. No wonder the galaxy is falling apart." "The humans were chosen precisely because they are unremarkable," Admiral Voss said quietly. His military bearing had shifted from combat alertness to something approaching awe. "No one suspects them of hidden agendas because they appear to have no power. No one fears human dominance because humans seem too weak to dominate. It's the perfect camouflage." Zara was beginning to understand the genius of it. For 3 years, she'd attended briefings, filed reports, and observed negotiations as a mid-level officer. No one had paid attention to her because there was no reason to pay attention. She'd been able to learn about every faction's strengths, weaknesses, fears, and motivations because they discussed everything freely in front of someone too unimportant to matter. "The Emergency Council placed observers in every major conflict zone," she said, reading from her files. "We've been gathering intelligence on this war since it started. Every battle, every atrocity, every failed negotiation. All of it was being analyzed to determine if intervention would be necessary." "And now it is," Vextha said. "The mathematics are clear. This conflict will escalate beyond the ability of either side to control it. Other powers will be drawn in. The Cetacean Collective will side with whoever offers better trade terms. The Silicon Republic will support whoever gives them access to the disputed mining systems. The war will spread until it consumes the entire council." Zara activated her new command interface, accessing real-time intelligence from across both military fleets. The picture it painted was worse than she'd feared. Both sides had moved far beyond the positions they'd declared in the negotiations. This wasn't defensive positioning. It was preparation for total warfare. "General Corinth," she said, displaying tactical data in the air above them using the chamber's holographic systems. "Your forces have massed 3,000 ships, but intelligence shows you've also positioned deep strike squadrons in 17 different systems. This isn't a defensive deployment. You're planning a first strike against coalition civilian infrastructure." Corinth's expression didn't change, but his secondary arms folded against his torso in a gesture that indicated confirmation among his species. "Admiral Voss," she continued, switching the display to show coalition positions. "Your fleet deployment includes antimatter mines positioned to target hegemony agricultural worlds. You're not just planning to attack military targets, you're planning to starve them into submission." Voss nodded slowly. "When your enemy shows no restraint, restraint becomes suicide." "Both of you are planning genocide," Zara said flatly. "The hegemony's plan would kill approximately 200 million coalition civilians in the first week. The coalition's agricultural targeting would cause mass starvation affecting over 1 billion hegemony citizens within 6 months. She expanded the holographic display to show projected casualty figures. The numbers were staggering. Conservative estimates suggested that if this war continued to its logical conclusion, it would result in the deaths of over 7 billion sentient beings across 43 star systems. "These are acceptable losses," General Corinth said, though his voice lacked its earlier conviction. "War is never clean. Victory requires sacrifice." "Sacrifice from whom?" Zara asked. "You'll be safe in your command bunkers. Your families live in the core systems that both sides have tacitly agreed not to target. The beings who will die are farmers and factory workers and children who have never heard of the trade disputes that started this war." She was accessing more files now, learning about the scope of the Emergency Council's authority. What she discovered was breathtaking in its implications. "I have the power to declare both of your governments illegitimate," she said. "Under Council emergency protocols, when member civilizations engage in actions that threaten galactic stability, the Emergency Council can revoke their sovereignty and place them under protective administration." Admiral Voss went very still. "You're talking about occupation, military conquest." "I'm talking about stopping a war that will kill billions," Zara replied. "But I'd rather find a solution that doesn't require conquering anyone." She turned to address the entire chamber, her voice carrying the new authority she was still learning to wield. "Everyone in this room is here because their people trusted them to find a solution. Your population sent you to make peace, not to manage the logistics of mutual extinction. So let's try something different." Zara activated her datapad's projection system, displaying a new holographic model above the assembly. Instead of showing military positions, it showed economic flows, resource distribution, and population centers across both the hegemony and coalition territories. The core issue isn't military, it's economic. The hegemony needs the rare earth elements in the disputed systems to maintain their industrial base. The coalition needs those same systems to remain independent because they can't compete with hegemony industrial capacity otherwise. You're fighting over resources, but you're destroying the very infrastructure needed to extract and process those resources. She manipulated the display, showing the effects of 3 years of warfare on the disputed systems. Mining operations destroyed, refining facilities bombed, transportation networks disrupted. The wealth both sides were fighting for was being systematically eliminated by the fighting itself. "What if," she said slowly, "instead of fighting over who owns these systems, we created a joint administration? Both sides contribute military protection. Both sides contribute technical expertise. Both sides share the profits proportionally based on their investment." General Corinth's laugh was derisive. "Share our technology with terrorists? Allow coalition oversight of hegemony operations? Impossible." "Why?" Zara asked. "Because they're your enemies? They're only your enemies because you're fighting. They became your enemies because you disagreed about the best way to manage these systems. If you're both managing them together, there's no longer anything to fight about." Admiral Voss was studying the economic projections she'd displayed. "It's not that simple. The political structures of our two governments are fundamentally incompatible. The hegemony is a corporate confederation. The coalition is a democratic alliance. We can't just merge our systems." "You don't have to merge anything," Zara said. "You just have to agree to cooperate in 17 star systems. Keep your separate governments, keep your separate military forces, keep your separate ideologies, but in the disputed systems, you work together." She was accessing more files, learning about precedents for this kind of arrangement. The Emergency Council had overseen similar resolutions before, though none on quite this scale. "The Proxima Accords," she said, reading from historical files. 200 years ago, the Cetacean Collective and the gas giant mining consortium had a similar conflict over energy production rights. The Emergency Council established a joint administrative zone that's still functioning today. Both sides prospered because they were able to focus on production instead of warfare. Delegate Sil 9 was studying the historical data, her scales shifting to a thoughtful blue-green. "The situations are not entirely analogous. The Cetacean Consortium conflict was over energy rights in uninhabited systems. Our war involves populated worlds with established governments." "Which makes peace even more important," Zara replied. "Those populated worlds are full of civilians who didn't ask to become battlefields. They just want to live their lives, raise their families, and pursue their own prosperity. Right now, they're caught between two military forces that see them as either resources to exploit or obstacles to eliminate." She was learning to use the chamber's advanced projection systems, displaying real-time communications from the disputed worlds. The messages were heartbreaking. Refugee camps requesting evacuation assistance, medical facilities running out of supplies, children asking when the shooting would stop. "These are the people you're supposedly fighting for," she said. "Look at them. Listen to them. Are their lives better now than they were 3 years ago?" The chamber had gone quiet, except for the soft sounds of the atmospheric recycling systems. Even the guards had stopped moving, focusing instead on the images of civilian suffering floating in the air above them. General Corinth was the first to speak. "Captain, Admiral, the military situation has progressed beyond the point where simple ceasefires are possible. My forces are already engaging coalition scouts in the outer systems. Admiral Voss has activated his antimatter mines in hegemony space. The shooting has already started." Zara felt her blood run cold. "When?" "Approximately 14 minutes ago," Admiral Voss confirmed. "My tactical network shows hegemony destroyers firing on coalition monitoring stations. We responded by detonating mines near hegemony supply convoys." She was already accessing the real-time tactical situation through her new command authority. The data was devastating. 3 hegemony ships destroyed, 2 coalition monitoring stations obliterated, casualties in the hundreds, and climbing rapidly as both sides escalated their responses. "How long before the main fleets engage?" she asked. Admiral Voss consulted his cybernetic implants. "At current acceleration rates, the leading elements will be in firing range within 6 hours." And once the main fleets engage? General Corinth's expression was grim. Total warfare becomes inevitable. Neither side can afford to show restraint when facing an existential threat. Zara closed her eyes, feeling the weight of 7 billion lives settling on her shoulders. When she opened them, her decision was made. "Then we stop them before they engage," she said. "I'm implementing Emergency Protocol 7 across all Council space. Every military vessel from every member civilization is hereby ordered to move to intercept positions between the hegemony and coalition fleets." The reaction was immediate and explosive. General Corinth rose to his full, intimidating height. "You cannot order hegemony forces to stand down. We are not a council protectorate." "Actually, I can," Zara said, accessing the legal frameworks built into Emergency Protocol 7. Every council member civilization agreed to Emergency Council authority when they joined. It's buried in subsection 47 of the membership accords, but it's binding galactic law. Admiral Voss was already trying to contact his fleet commanders, but his communications were being blocked by the same jamming systems that had sealed the chamber. "This is madness. You're talking about using council forces against the sovereign militaries of member civilizations." "I'm talking about preventing a war that will destroy everything the council was created to protect," Zara replied. "But I'm hoping we won't need to fight anyone. I'm hoping that cooler heads will prevail when everyone has time to think instead of react." She was still learning about her new authority, but the scope of it was incredible. Emergency Protocol 7 gave her command over not just Council peacekeeping forces, but also emergency requisition authority over any member civilization's military during existential crises. "How many ships do you have?" General Corinth asked, his tactical mind already calculating odds. Zara smiled, though it felt strange on her face given the circumstances. "All of them. Every ship in Council space except yours and the Coalition's." The number was staggering. The Cetacean Collective maintained a fleet of over 800 vessels for protecting their trade routes. The Silicon Republic had nearly 1,000 defensive platforms and mobile units. The Wise Ones, despite their peaceful reputation, commanded some of the most advanced military technology in known space. Smaller member civilizations contributed hundreds of additional ships. In total, she had just assumed command of approximately 4,000 military vessels, representing the combined defensive forces of 37 different civilizations. "You would turn the entire galaxy against us?" Admiral Voss asked quietly. "I would turn the entire galaxy toward peace," Zara corrected. "But if that requires stopping you from killing each other, then yes." She activated the emergency communication systems, broadcasting simultaneously to every council member civilization. Her words would reach presidents and prime ministers, military commanders and civilian leaders across hundreds of star systems. "This is Fleet Admiral Martinez, call sign Ordinary, speaking under Emergency Protocol 7 authority," she began. "I am ordering the immediate deployment of all available Council military forces to prevent an extinction-level conflict between the Hegemony Alliance and the Outer Rim Coalition." She paused, looking around the chamber at the beings who had trusted her with their arguments, their fears, and their hopes for peace. "The shooting has already started. We have perhaps 6 hours before this becomes a war that will consume the galaxy. I need every ship, every crew, and every civilization that believes in the possibility of peace to help me stop it." The response was immediate. Her implant began receiving confirmations from across Council space. Ship after ship, fleet after fleet, accepting her authority and moving to intercept positions. General Corinth was accessing his own tactical networks, trying to contact his fleet commanders. His expression showed growing alarm as he realized the scope of what was happening. "They're surrounding us," he said quietly. "Every approach vector to Coalition space is being blocked by Council forces." Admiral Voss was having the same realization. "My fleet is reporting Council ships moving to surround them as well. We're being boxed in." You're being given time to think, Zara said. Your fleets can't engage each other because there are now neutral forces between you. You can't escalate because any attack on Council ships would make you enemies of the entire galaxy. What you can do is talk. She deactivated the jamming systems, allowing communication to flow freely again, but maintained the lockdown protocols that kept everyone in the chamber. So let's talk. Not about who's right or who's wrong. Not about who started what or who deserves what. Let's talk about what galaxy you want your children to inherit. The silence that followed Zara's words stretched across the chamber like a living thing. Outside, through the transparent aluminum viewports, she could see the lights of ships beginning to take position around the station. Council vessels from dozens of different civilizations, their varied designs creating a constellation of peaceful intervention between two massive war fleets. Admiral Voss was the first to break the silence. My tactical officers are reporting that Coalition forces are completely surrounded. Every escape vector is blocked by Council ships. He paused, studying his data feeds. They're not targeting us. They're just there. General Corinth's scaled hide had shifted to a pale green, indicating confusion among his species. Hegemony Command is requesting orders. Our fleet commanders want to know if they should engage the Council forces or attempt to break through to Coalition space. What did you tell them? Zara asked. Nothing yet, Corinth admitted, because I'm not certain what the correct answer is anymore. Through her expanded command interface, Zara could monitor communications across all three fleets. The chatter was remarkable in its consistency. Ship after ship, commander after commander, expressing the same sentiment. Relief. Relief that someone had finally stepped in to stop the madness. Your fleet commanders don't want to fight, she observed, sharing selected communication intercepts on the chamber's displays. Listen to them. They're soldiers, not zealots. They joined the military to protect their people, not to commit genocide. The intercepts painted a picture that contradicted everything the political rhetoric had suggested. Hegemony ship captains questioning the wisdom of targeting civilian infrastructure. Coalition squadron leaders expressing doubts about the morality of using weapons of mass destruction. Neither military actually wanted the war their governments were demanding. Delegate Silnine had been quietly reviewing the economic projections Zara had displayed earlier. Now she spoke up, her scales showing the deep blue of serious contemplation. The resource-sharing proposal you outlined. What would prevent one side from gradually gaining control over the joint administration zones? The same thing that prevents it in any successful partnership, Zara replied. Mutual benefit. If both sides are profiting from cooperation, neither has incentive to destabilize the arrangement. She manipulated the holographic display to show detailed economic models. The mathematics were compelling. Joint administration would actually increase resource extraction efficiency by 30%, while reducing operational costs by nearly half. Both sides would end up wealthier than either could manage alone. But this requires trust, Admiral Voss said. How do we trust an enemy that has spent 3 years trying to destroy us? The same way the enemy learns to trust you, Zara answered. Slowly, carefully, and with verification at every step. She was accessing historical precedents again, learning about the mechanisms the Emergency Council had developed for transitioning from warfare to cooperation. The protocols were sophisticated, built on centuries of experience with exactly this kind of situation. We start small, she explained. One system, one joint mining operation. Both sides contribute equal resources, equal personnel, equal oversight. Profits are divided exactly according to investment. Every transaction is transparent. Every decision is made jointly. Every concern is addressed immediately. General Corinth was studying the proposed framework with the analytical mind of a career military officer. What prevents sabotage? What stops either side from undermining the operation to make the other look incompetent? The fact that sabotage would cost you money, Zara said simply. If you sabotage a joint operation, you're sabotaging your own investment. If you make your partners look incompetent, you're making yourself look incompetent because you chose those partners. The genius of it was economic self-interest. Both sides would have powerful incentives to make their partners successful because partnership success was the only path to personal success. There's another factor, Counselor Vextha said quietly. The emergency council protocols include provision for neutral arbitrators in joint administration zones, beings with no stake in either side's success, tasked only with ensuring fair implementation of agreements. Zara nodded, reading through those protocols as they appeared in her implant. The arbitration system was elegant in its simplicity. Disputes would be resolved by neutral parties whose only interest was in maintaining stable, profitable operations. Neither side could manipulate the system because neither side controlled it. Who would these arbitrators be? Admiral Voss asked suspiciously. Council species with no economic interest in the disputed resources, Vextha explained. The Wise Ones have served this function before, as have the Ethereal Collective and several others. We profit from galactic stability, not from resource extraction. Through the viewport, Zara could see more ships arriving. The Council fleet was growing larger by the hour as civilizations across the galaxy responded to her emergency authorization. She was watching something unprecedented, every peaceful species in known space uniting to prevent a war. Her communication implant chimed with an incoming priority message from Admiral Chen, commander of the Council's primary peacekeeping fleet. Admiral Martinez, came the voice she remembered from Academy lectures on military ethics. Admiral Chen reporting. Council forces are in position around both fleets. We have successfully created a stable intervention zone. Neither side can engage the other without engaging us first. Casualties? Zara asked. None. Both sides are maintaining defensive positions but have not fired on Council vessels. I think they're as relieved as we are that someone finally stepped in. General Corinth had been listening to the exchange with growing thoughtfulness. Now he stood and walked to the viewport, gazing out at the growing constellation of ships surrounding his forces. In 40 years of military service, he said quietly, I have never seen anything like this. Every Council species, working together, risking their own ships to prevent a war they're not even involved in. Why? What do they gain from stopping us? Peace, Zara said simply. A stable galaxy where trade flows, ideas are exchanged, and children grow up without learning to hate entire civilizations. They gain the kind of future most beings want to live in. She was beginning to understand something profound about her role as Admiral Ordinary. It wasn't about having the most powerful fleet or the most advanced technology. It was about being the person who could stand in front of warriors and remind them what they were fighting for. Admiral Voss had been reviewing communication logs from his own fleet. My squadron commanders are requesting clarification on rules of engagement. They want to know what happens if they stand down their weapon systems and hegemony forces don't reciprocate. Then Council forces will protect them, Zara said without hesitation. That's why we're here. Neither side has to trust the other yet. You just have to trust us. It was a remarkable moment. Two civilizations that had spent 3 years learning to hate each other were being asked to put down their weapons based on faith in neutral parties they barely knew. Yet somehow, it was working. Admiral Martinez, General Corinth said formally, if the hegemony agrees to participate in joint administration of the disputed systems, what guarantees do we have that coalition forces won't use the cessation of hostilities to rebuild their military for a future attack? The same guarantees they have that you won't do the same thing, Zara replied. Mutual inspection protocols, shared intelligence on military production, and the knowledge that any renewed hostilities would bring the entire Council back to stop them. She activated new displays showing the proposed monitoring systems. Both sides would be required to provide transparency about their military activities, not enough to compromise legitimate security needs, but enough to ensure that neither was preparing for renewed warfare. More importantly, she added, you'll both be too busy making money to build massive war fleets. Profitable cooperation tends to be more attractive than expensive conflict. Delegate Silnine was consulting with her advisors through subspace communication. When she returned her attention to the chamber, her scales had shifted to the golden hue that indicated decision-making among her species. The Coalition Council is willing to consider joint administration, she said carefully, provided that indigenous population rights are protected and environmental standards are maintained in all operations. General Corinth's response was equally cautious. The Hegemony Board of Directors will evaluate the proposal, provided that existing corporate investments are protected and operational efficiency standards are maintained. It wasn't enthusiastic agreement, but it was progress. Both sides were negotiating instead of shooting, which was more than anyone had achieved in 3 years of warfare. Excellent, Zara said, feeling a weight beginning to lift from her shoulders. We'll establish the Joint Administration Zone in the Kepler system. It's centrally located, has significant mineral resources, and the existing infrastructure can be shared relatively easily. She was already accessing the logistical frameworks for implementing joint operations. The Emergency Council had refined these procedures through centuries of conflict resolution. Everything from communication protocols to profit-sharing mechanisms had been tested and proven in previous interventions. What about the existing populations? Admiral Voss asked. The Kepler system has approximately 2 million civilian residents. They didn't ask to become test subjects for experimental governance. They'll be asked, Zara said firmly. Joint administration only proceeds with the consent of the beings who actually live in the affected systems. They get to vote on whether they want to continue under the existing arrangement, join the joint administration, or request relocation assistance to territories under single government control. It was a radical concept, letting the people who lived in disputed territories decide their own fate instead of having it imposed by distant governments or military forces. But it was also the only approach that respected the basic dignity of sentient beings. Admiral Chen's voice came through her implant again. Admiral Martinez, I'm receiving reports that both fleets are powering down their weapons systems. Hegemony forces are moving to defensive formations. Coalition ships are deactivating their antimatter mines. Zara felt a surge of hope so strong it was almost physical. Confirmed. Maintain positions but begin transitioning to peacekeeping formation. We're moving from intervention to mediation. Around the chamber, she could see the change in everyone's posture. The rigid tension of beings preparing for war was gradually giving way to the more relaxed alertness of those engaged in difficult but productive negotiations. There's something else we need to discuss, Counselor Vextha said. The Emergency Council protocols require full disclosure once they've been activated. Admiral Martinez, the people of the galaxy will need to learn that their governments have been operating under hidden oversight for centuries. Zara hadn't considered that implication. Every civilization in Council space would discover that their sovereignty had been subject to emergency override by a secret authority they'd never heard of. It could cause massive political upheaval. Will they accept it? She asked. They will when they understand the alternative, Vextha replied. The Emergency Council has prevented 17 potential extinction events over the past 4 centuries. Most civilizations never knew how close they came to total war. They'll be grateful for the intervention once they understand what it prevented. General Corinth was accessing his own historical databases, reading about previous Emergency Council interventions. His expression showed growing amazement as he learned about conflicts that had been resolved before they could spread beyond their originating systems. The Andromedan Trade War, he said, reading from his display. The Silicon Republic succession crisis, the Great Plague Response Coordination, all of these were managed by the Emergency Council. All of them, Vextha confirmed. And in every case, the intervention was successful because someone ordinary enough to be trusted by all sides was given extraordinary authority to act. Admiral Voss was coming to a realization. That's why you chose humans for this role. We're the newest species in the Council, the least threatening, the most underestimated. No one fears human domination, because humans seem too weak to dominate anyone. But we're not too weak to care, Zara added, understanding at last why she had been chosen. We're just weak enough that everyone believes our motives are genuine, strong enough to act, weak enough to trust. The irony was beautiful in its effectiveness. Humanity's perceived ordinariness was exactly what made them extraordinary in this role. They could command respect without inspiring fear, exercise authority without seeming threatening. The Joint Administration Framework is being transmitted to both governments now, Admiral Chen reported through her implant. Initial responses are positive. Both sides are agreeing to detailed negotiations. Outside the viewport, Zara could see ships beginning to move into new formations. Instead of the aggressive positioning of opposing fleets, vessels were arranging themselves into the cooperative patterns used for joint operations. Hegemony ships moving alongside coalition vessels, with council ships maintaining oversight positions throughout the combined fleet. Admiral Martinez, General Corinth said formally, the hegemony wishes to thank you for your intervention. Our civilization will remember this day. Admiral Voss nodded in agreement. The coalition seconds that sentiment. You prevented a tragedy that would have consumed the galaxy. Zara looked around the chamber at the beings who had trusted her with their fears, their hopes, and their children's futures. She was still Captain Zara Martinez, still ordinary in every way that mattered. But she was also Admiral Ordinary, the human who had reminded the galaxy that peace was possible. The war is over, she said simply. The real work starts now. Through her implant, she could feel the vast network of beings across hundreds of star systems, beginning the complex process of building peace. It would take years, probably decades, to fully implement the joint administration zones and resolve all the underlying issues that had caused the conflict. But for the first time in 3 years, children in the disputed systems would go to sleep without the sound of distant explosions. Families separated by the war would begin planning reunions. Soldiers who had spent months preparing to die would start thinking about going home. It wasn't a perfect peace. There would be setbacks, disagreements, and moments when old hatreds threatened to reignite. But it was a beginning. And sometimes, Zara reflected as she watched the lights of a peaceful galaxy spreading out before her, a beginning was all that ordinary people needed to create something extraordinary.